The X-Men.
All right, Dr. Rob, you're live.
Record.
Yeah.
What is up, everybody? It's Dr. Vibe here, host and producer of the award-winning The Dr. Vibe Show. With tonight,
The X-Men.
once a month,
All right, Dr. Rob, you're live.
I love to do what we call M&M Explorers, which is produced by the Men and Masculinity team, which consists of Lee Rosen, program lead, Terry, Michelle, and Steve. And we always have great conversations about men and masculinity that's for everyone to hear, listen, and grow and learn from. We are back again with, I guess, our lead hand when it comes to guests. Robert Leung is back with us tonight. Robert, how we doing? You are on mute, Robert.
Okay.
Now you're not on mute. There we go.
I'm doing great tonight, Dr. Vibe. As always, looking forward to a terrific conversation with you and Lee and guests. So ready to rock.
Fantastic. And just want to say right up front, if you want to find out anything more about men and masculinity and see some of the replays of some of our past epic conversations and also highlights from previous summits, just go to www.menandmasculinity.com. And tonight we're continuing to have great topics. Tonight we're going to be chatting about how would the world be different if men could feel. And it's interesting. I was speaking with a lady before this. We went live and I told her about this and she goes, yeah, it would be different. It would be different. So we had a long conversation on ways that she felt it would be different. And I just listened. I felt, I did the feeling in regards to that. So Robert, why did you want to choose this conversation topic for this episode?
Well, I think the topic's a bit of an oxymoron because obviously men do feel.
So we had
do they have the full range of the ability to feel full range of emotions and the permission to express a full range of emotions? And I guess that's what that question is meant to evoke, because it seems like men don't feel, and that's very often the accusation and the stereotype that we've been stuck with. And it's not invalid on some level to the extent that we don't express our emotions, but we clearly feel a lot. And that's what the discussion's really about.
Let me ask if you're open enough when you were growing up, and we're all still growing up, just depends what direction we're growing. I don't know. Just saying growing
up, right?
Yeah, right. Take us back to your earlier days, emotion-wise.
Yeah.
The men in your life, did they display feelings at all?
No, they didn't. I mean, that was pretty much, and starting with my father and my uncles who lived nearby as well, who I spent time with. The model for men was that you don't express emotion. You know, you're stoic, you're silent most of the time. You know, you're completely inward, and that was the manifestation of masculinity. And it showed up in media and movies, television, books, wherever it was. That was the model for being a man. So that's what I learned, you know, don't be soft, don't express your emotions.
So when in your journey did you begin to turn from that thought process or that environment that had influence on you? When did you begin to turn from that?
Yeah, you know, I would say that it began in an earlier stage, like probably in my early teens, and I have a creative background, and I think that had a lot to do with it. I think the ability to explore creatively in art, in particular, but in any kind of creative endeavor, I think leads you to discover your feelings and your emotions as the guidepost and the source of creativity. So I think that's one of the things that sort of kept me moving or leaning in that direction, but still trying to put on the tough masculine face and appearance that was being shown to me and directing me in my earlier stage of life.
When you began to make that turn, how did that affect the relationships with the men around you at that time?
Yeah, I mean, I think I didn't have a lot of friends growing up. I had like one or two close friends. And so, and with the other friends that I had beyond that close friendship, you sort of put on your masculine face, you know what I mean? You sort of did what they did, and you sort of fell into that dynamic, and you knew how to, and everybody knew how to do that. I don't know if I was the only one who, I suspect that there were others, men in the group also, who questioned what the dynamic was and how they should appear, and is this the right thing to do? But I didn't know anything else. I mean, that's what I saw. That's what I saw in my father. That's what I saw in television, in the movies. James Bond and myriad other, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and just this tough guy kind of thing. And that's the way to be a man.
Okay. You have and you continue to mentor many men. And how does it make you feel to see that over the years, over the journey of mentoring men of all different ages for a number of years, this still is a talking point?
Yeah.
Do you still have those fingernail gummies around?
Who's that?
That's okay. Thank you. Go ahead.
It's interesting. I mean, I think I was very hopeful. I think probably through the 80s and 90s, I think I was more hopeful that there was a dynamic change in men and the opportunity for men to discover the power of their emotions. I mean, emotions are instincts. We look at emotions as weaknesses, as faults in us, but they're designed to keep us alive. They're powerful dynamics that keep us alive and keep us alert and tell us how to interact with our environment. And most men don't see their emotions that way. And once you understand that without those instincts, you probably wouldn't survive, you tend to look at your emotions in a very different way. We only look at, one or two emotions. We look at anger and silence, which is not an emotion. I mean, so maybe it's just one emotion. We look at anger and then the other one is just not expressing any emotion.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a pretty limited dynamic. And when you begin to realize that those are instincts built to help you survive, and that repressing those instincts has tremendous psychological and medical health issues are a result of repressing those emotions. So we begin to start to examine the cost of not expressing your emotions, mm-hmm. that it can directly affect your life. You begin to look at them differently. And I began to investigate some of that. And I was always an emotional man. I think that the dynamic of being creative was part of that. But I always felt that, and I wrestled with how much do you show. I learned to put a face on, but a lot of times I wasn't really good at it because part of me resented having to use my emotions. Basically, you'll excuse it, but fuck that. I mean, I just didn't feel like that was really legitimate to do that. I thought I'm going to express myself the way that I want to express myself. And to me, that's a demonstration of true masculinity. To not be governed by what other people think. You make your own decisions about what you think is right and wrong. So there are fundamental issues built around that expression of who you are.
Mm-hmm. So, and it says that you said earlier on that you had hope in the 80s and 90s.
Right.
What has regressed this hope?
Well, at that time I looked at, there was, certainly a rise in feminine power in our culture and society. And I thought I joined the men's organization and I've been part of that for, 30 years. And that's when I began to see that dynamic even more, and saw the conflict between men and women and where they were not able to agree, and the rise of women in power socially. And I thought there was a decline in men's, I don't want to say power, but their efficacy within the social environment and their own sense of self. And they kind of withdrew into this, they kind of hunkered down. They didn't change in particular, but they kind of just sort of gathered together and tried to, support each other that way. And that's part of what we were doing. But it also helped me understand our fear of emotion and our inexperience with emotion, because we haven't had the freedom to express ourselves. We don't know how to use them. We don't know what it looks like. We're afraid of how we appear. And once I realized that it was a fear dynamic, then I thought, how can this be strong? How can this be powerful if we're afraid of expressing our emotions? There was a disconnect there, you know? So I began to really explore that as a quest for men to really delve into that and discover their power within. I began to read more about it. I read Brene Brown's book. I began to explore that as a coach and personally to explore that. What are the boundaries for men to express themselves emotionally? And if it's a matter of your personal health to begin with, both physical and psychological, how can you not?
True. You mentioned about the effect of the changing dynamics of women in society. How do you feel from where you sit that's affect men's feelings, men and their feelings?
Well, I think it's been really challenging for men. I think they, without being able to make full use of your instincts, and by those I mean emotions, by sort of repressing your instincts, you're left at a considerable disadvantage to respond to anything, frankly. And I think that emotions are a great source of our power. So to deny them, I think, weakened us and continues to weaken us as a society. I think men still are not out there, defining themselves without caring about how they look. And that to me is true power and true independence and a true sense of self, which is what men tend to pride themselves on, is that they are individuals that live by their own code. I mean, that's one of the stereotypical definitions, but I believe it is true. And in order to get back to that, we have to know how we feel about ourselves and about everything around us and be willing to express that.
It's good. It's very, very good. When you bring up this topic to other men for the first time, well, how do they respond?
Well, I mean, I think there's a mixed response. I mean, there's some men who are outright against it, and I think it's a small percentage, but they may be pretty verbal about it. And then I think there's a larger group that's interested, that they've got some feelings in that area or have experienced feelings in that area, and they're looking for a way to make sense of it. How do I balance this? How do I look like a man and yet still be able to express my feelings? And that is a bit of a puzzle, and it takes some practice to do that. But I think there's a big component of that is self-acceptance. And I think if you're not accepting yourself, you're going to always be at a disadvantage. And I think being able to express your emotions is a definitive part of you accepting yourself. You've got to know how you feel in order to fully accept yourself. You can't do it just based on, on rote, on things that you've been told to do. You've got to experience you for yourself in order to move forward powerfully. And that's what I tell men.
It's interesting. One of the things, and I'm just soaking this all in, I love what you said. If you don't accept yourself, you'll always be at a disadvantage. Now that's very powerful. Then would it be out there to say, or maybe okay to say, that there's a lot of men that are disadvantaged right now?
Yeah, absolutely. And we're raised that way. We're conditioned that way by our parents. Typical fathering, and that's what I got from my father, is you tough it out, you don't cry, you don't show those kinds of emotions, and it's reinforced in society. It's, as I said, movies, television, books, comic book, whatever it is, you're reinforced with the stereotype of masculinity. Some of it's shifted. I mean, there's a bit of a different dialogue around that, but it's certainly still not a mainstream dialogue. And even if it was more mainstream, it's a process that you have to go through, and men have to support each other in that process. There's still a lot of shaming that goes on around this dynamic. There's still a very mixed conversation about men and women, and I don't even talk about women's liberation anymore, whatever that's called now. That women have moved much further forward on their side of the equation in terms of liberating themselves than men have.
Why is that, in your opinion?
I think they've had more license to be able to do that. I think women have had the permission, the social permission, to be emotionally expressive in whatever way they want to. That they were never told that you can't express your emotions. However a woman expressed herself was okay. Women are emotional. That's the dynamic. They own that environment. The fact is that men are very emotional. And I was reading today in a Harvard Medical School report, and Psychology Today was saying how young boys from infancy to maybe 6 or 7 years old are actually more emotional than young girls. They actually express more emotion. And somewhere in between that time and, puberty, something nails those emotions down. And men fall into that stereotypical place of shutting down and not showing how they feel. And as a consequence, are losing touch with who they are. So then you're left to create some kind of arbitrary standard to follow, which has nothing to do with your internal desires and your internal awareness of yourself. I mean, the biggest problem is men are not aware of what's going on for them, and consequently who they are, what they really want. So we're at a considerable disadvantage.
So do you feel then, and it's interesting, I'll take myself as an example. I didn't really start to I don't like the word connect, realize and start the journey of understanding my feelings when I stopped thinking about career first.
Right.
When I stopped thinking about career first, then I began to say there's a deeper side of me. There's another side of me that I haven't even touched. I haven't even started the journey with. Right. And I have a feeling that may be the case for a lot of men that are either watching this or maybe watching this on a replay. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's true. I don't know when it happens or if it happens for most men that they come to that question. I think that we go through this kind of stereotypical, caricature of masculinity. And at some point it meets, some kind of conflict, and maybe you join a men's group, or maybe you do, there's another option that awakens you in some way, or you sense your own discomfort, you follow through, you go to therapy, whatever it is, that it begins to open you up. But I think for a lot of men that doesn't happen. I don't think they engage in that conversation, and so they're left to figure out and manage it however they do. But as I said, I think there are health consequences, psychological consequences to that, and just the satisfaction, happiness with your life.
I agree. And again, we'll never take our thoughts off of 2020 and how this year is having an effect on men's emotions.
Really? Yeah.
And again, with the men that you speak with, how are their feelings? The men you're speaking with, how are they doing with their feelings through this time?
Well, I think they're challenged just like everybody else is, both men and women, obviously. But I think it's, at least the ones I'm engaging with, I'm encouraging that conversation to look at what matters to you. Particularly at this time now, what matters, where in many legitimate cases where our lives are threatened. The lives of the people we care about are threatened in a much more dramatic way, and one that is not easy to define or necessarily defend against at this time. So it makes everybody feel more fragile and vulnerable. And some people, myself included, on occasions just try to ignore it and tune it out. But I think if you're gonna accept it and be involved and address it, it takes a kind of emotional strength to be able to do that.
True. Just want to shout out that our fans or our supporters or our audience that's watching live on Facebook, thank you so much. If you have any questions and or comments, the program lead for the Men of Masculinity team is watching the Facebook page. So anything you'd like to share, Robert and I will certainly be aware of it and brought to our notification. Robert, if this is, for many men, this is a hard topic because it goes real deep.
Yeah.
And I have a feeling that maybe I'm going to put it out there. I think there are many men who know about this, but they don't want to put their toe in the water.
Yeah.
You know where I'm coming from?
A big risk. Yeah. I think that's why joining a group or being part of, a therapy group, whatever it is, to get into that dialogue, don't try to do it alone. Get support. There are plenty of men's groups around available and coaching available to help in that process. So I encourage men not to do that alone, to be in dialogue with each other in a group and have that kind of support. Because I think it's very frightening. You're talking about your definition of who you are as a man. So that's a pretty important definition to be facing,
Absolutely. It's a very important one. And the thing is, I don't think the school system teaches that to them.
No, it doesn't. I mean, nowhere is that taught, frankly. That's the problem.
And I think, and the state of families these days, is that
No, it's not something that's in our dialogue at all. So where do you go to get that support? And that's part of the problem.
So why does our society continue to leave this important quadrant part of society? Why does it get put aside? Some men would say we're devalued. And not only they say they're devalued, they may not even realize that they devalue themselves, but they feel society is devaluing themselves, so they don't have the opportunity to give out their feelings because they don't feel that they can do it in a brave and safe space.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also part of the dynamic of masculinity itself, that asking for help is seen as a sign of weakness. So you kind of, you build this kind of circular reasoning for staying in the same place. You can't ask for help because that doesn't look masculine, but I want to be more masculine. So how do I get out of that cycle? And that's why I think you need to do it with a group, with support, with coaching, whatever will get you to that place. If you're interested in doing that, there are a number of groups involved. I did this Sterling Men's Weekend for one, which is a pretty intense weekend. But there are the journeymen. There are a number of men's groups out there that can begin that dialogue and begin that journey towards being with other men. Just being with other men is an education.
Sure.
If you don't have a circle of friends, I didn't have that. I developed and created a circle, joined the men's team, which I've been part of, for 30 years, meeting once a week for 30 years. I mean, that's, the kind of work that's available.
Let's go back 30 years. And again, I'm going to encourage people to share comments.
I'd like to go back 30 years.
Well, yeah, you got me. Touche. Let's say thought-wise.
Right.
Well, okay. Well, maybe we'll go in the capsule for a few moments and then come back and come out brand new. After that Sterling event, what did you do to start getting more? I don't like to say in contact, more realizing, more adept with your feelings. What's some of the things you started doing? And the reason I'm saying that is to be an example for others, that maybe give examples on what you started doing to start U-turning, for lack of a better phrase.
Yeah, well, I think it started before that, but that was certainly a big step, because that put me in contact with a group of men that were not my friends. They were complete strangers, and they became my men's team. I think there were 12 of us in the beginning. And so there was a group of men that I would not be friends with, that I probably wouldn't ordinarily associate with, and some of them I didn't even like. But that was good. I think that was
Yeah.
also good because I got different information and different perspective that I would not ordinarily have gotten. And so it really was a great training ground. And over time, as I said, some of these men I'm still meeting with 30 years later.
So something just came to my mind. This, in many cases, involves risk.
Yeah, all growth involves risk.
Okay. Okay. So we have a comment here from Facebook. Derek is saying masculine emotions need to be dealt with men, not with women.
Absolutely.
Women can't and don't understand masculine emotions, whether they are mature or immature. You want to add to that?
No, I totally agree. You don't have to say anything else. It should remain concise. It doesn't have to be explained. Men understand men's emotions, and I think that's the place to explore them.
Wonderful. Wonderful. So if women want to understand us emotionally, what do we tell them?
That's a whole separate, the separate conversation I was going to say. But what we would say is, if you want to understand us, watch us. Watch us.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. When I am given advice from couples, if they are at loggerheads and one wants to say, what should I do with the other person? Say, give them freedom.
Yeah.
Watch them with freedom.
And trust.
Yes.
And trust is the other side of that. Trust that if you're going to be with that person, you've got to have a certain level of trust. Not everything can be designed and explained and spelled out. There's a certain amount of trust that has to be involved. And that's a huge piece of the equation. Because in trusting someone else, I think it's really about you trusting yourself.
Yes.
And that's why I think it's so difficult for people to trust. Because they can't trust themselves.
Yeah, we got about 6 or 7 layers we could go down on that on that road itself.
This is deep. You're right.
But this is what we're here to do, though. This is what we're here to have, those deep conversations about those important subjects that help men and manhood. With the younger men of today, how do you feel they're on I guess I'll invent it, the feeling scale from 1 to 10 these days, from where you're sitting? And obviously you don't have a view of the whole world, but for the young people you do see, whether it's media wise or in your daily journey.
My sense of that in dialogue with some younger men is that there's a lot of emoting. I don't know that there's not necessarily a lot of emotional coherence in that process, though. So I think there's more expression necessarily, but I don't know that it's necessarily coherent, that it's building towards a strength. So I think they have more freedom to express their emotions, but I don't think it's necessarily liberating them. I think it's a little bit more petulant, a little bit more immature.
So then what do you feel then is missing here? Because it's interesting. You're saying they're emoting, but they're not sharing their feelings. Where's the missing piece or pieces with them?
Yeah, I'm not saying that they're not sharing their feelings, but it's more, I don't want to say it's more tantrum-like than it is,
Missing here, because it's
a mature expression of what's going on for them.
Right. Okay. And obviously,
I think that takes and obviously it takes a kind of training. We're like completely inexperienced at doing this, and so you need to be sort of brought along in this process. That's why I suggest getting involved in a group or doing some coaching or even therapy for that matter. But to learn how to have that dialogue with yourself first of all, and then to have it with others. But it's easier in a group, and having that support matters.
Great. I just want to welcome, I see some more people are coming into the conversation on Zoom and on Facebook. Again, please feel free, share your comments, questions. We'll be happy to have Robert and myself answer them to the best of our abilities. With the current, I live in Canada, for those people who don't know. I want to focus on men in America with what's going on in America right now. and, it's,
Yeah.
I'm seeing, especially when I was growing up, I can relate to my father. I call it the seesaw feelings, either really up or really down, or not really down, really up or really quiet. I wouldn't say down, but quiet.
Right.
In the climate that we're in these days, is that even becoming more and more extreme? Those two ends of, as I like to call it, the feeling seesaw?
Yeah, I think that's a fair observation. I think in a lot of ways, people don't know how to respond. You know, I think there is a lot of fear and a lot of disinformation, and a lot of unknowns still exist. So I think that people are kind of hunkered down, literally and physically, and I think emotionally as well. I mean, I think it is a fearful time.
With your experience, and I don't want to talk you out, so I'll make sure I can jump in as much as possible
Yeah,
here
absolutely.
this evening. What are some of the feelings that you feel men need to get out, but they're not? Or that, or from when your conversations with men over the years, what are some of the feelings that they are, for lack of a better, hesitant? I wasn't going to say.
So we had Morris Jones. He was in Scranton. I won't roll the tape.
Not sure what that was, but I would say that probably the feelings of hurt and shame are probably the two that come to mind.
Okay, so let's delve down a little bit deeper. And do they get down to, do you hear any areas where they're feeling hurt and shame from? I could mention one, maybe hurt from father relationship or lack of father relationship. Is that
absolutely
one?
That's absolutely one. Yeah, and I think a lot of this, all of the things we're talking about in terms about defining your masculinity, comes from that one issue of you know, your relationship with your father, certainly. And yes, and certainly some of the shame can be built around that as well. You know, how your father sees you, and do you live up to his image of you? And you know, that starts the process of having to live up to something, you know, that's not your vision, it's somebody else's, you know.
Right. Again, from my own experience, I had some challenging times with my dad, and
Yeah, me too.
The feelings sometimes got pretty intense, but an unfortunate fortunate, it took him having a quadruple bypass surgery for those feelings to come out.
Yeah.
You know,
that's tough.
It is, and but again, the extremes of life really put a stamp on where a man, this is just my opinion, my thought process, where a man stands with his emotions, where he is on the compass of feelings. And I a lot of, and you know, putting it aside, I asked Robert to help me with a man that I'm mentoring, and unfortunately we didn't get a chance to speak with him, but his feelings with his father, oh my goodness,
Really?
Very, very. And this is a man that's in his late 40s, early 50s.
Yeah.
And he openly admitted it's weighing him down in his everyday life. He can't express himself. He feels that weight. That's very, very challenging. And I always say that one of the key things with a man is, how is or was your relationship with your father?
Yeah, absolutely. That defines you, and that's an example of it. Here's a man who's 40 years old, and he's still being run by that experience, and in a lot of cases not able to confront it. You know, so it's going to continue. And in a sense, and I experienced this too. It wasn't until in my 40s that I really dealt with my relationship with my father as well. And you know, until you do deal with that, you're still a child on some level. I think a lot of men don't understand that. These are men who already have families and have children and think they're operating as men, but there's part of them that's still a child to their father. You know, so how do you make that transition? How do you step into your own masculinity when you're subservient to the alpha male? You know, in the animal kingdom, there's a passage there. You have a fight, You defeat your father and you step into the role that you were meant to step into. We don't have that process. So how do you create a dynamic for that? Not necessarily a fight, but a powerful conversation.
Yeah, I think in many cultures, a number of cultures, they have the rites of passage.
Right. Exactly. We don't. And I think we suffer for that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Big time. I think that would make the feelings part very good. Actually, I went through a rites of passage for elders.
Right.
Which is a great experience. And the men that I shared with then, we became a brotherhood, and we could sit around a table, express, share.
Exactly.
Those are the things these things are okay. But if men can do it, well, obviously right now it's not easy to do physically, but
there's Zoom,
Yeah, well, there is the Zoom, especially to cover the distance. Zoom does cover, but if you can ever get together and sit down at a table and just chop it up, as I like to say.
Right. Look each other in the eye and deliver.
Absolutely. The deliver part is really, really important. Feelings. Let me ask too, with the men that you're mentoring or have mentoring, what changes do you see in them when they start to address their feelings? What have they told you how their life has become different? And hopefully in a positive way, but how is, if you can give some examples on some men, when men deal with their feelings in the right way.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the first thing you see is a greater sense of self-confidence. Literally stepping into themselves. It's almost if it was a shell, and they come in and they can now animate that. And I think that's one of the key things. And then I think another one is to be able to have conversations with other people in your life, like your father, for example, that are the conversation that you've been needing to have, for, a decade maybe. And here you are, as I said, an adult man, a father with children, and not able to have a conversation where you can tell your father, just like any other man, here's how I feel about you. And here's the things that I have an issue with. And here's the things I don't like, and to have that kind of conversation. And that's the passage that you were talking about. And it doesn't have to be confrontational. It doesn't have to be anything more than honest. But that is the ultimate conversation for every man, And if you don't have that, I mean, it's not the end of the world, obviously, but it's an important dynamic to have. If it's available to you, I recommend that every man have that conversation with their father, and maybe they write down what they'd like to say first, to get it out, understand it a little bit, talk to somebody else about it if that is necessary, talk to a coach or a therapist, or just some other men and get their opinions of it. But that conversation, that's the passage you were talking about.
Yeah.
Hey, Dr. Vine?
Yes.
So I can answer that from a different perspective.
Please do.
Yeah, because Robert was my coach for a number of years, and I was one of those men in that, I knew what the right thing to do was in the situation. And I knew how to modify myself to do the right thing in the situation. But I didn't know what I felt about it. I knew what the right thing, and those underlying things, not knowing what I felt about it, caused a tremendous amount of internal strife that I just dealt with quietly, which would fester and turned into resentments. And I remember a lot of conversations Robert and I would have, and Robert would say, how do you feel about that, Lee? And then I'd describe the situation for 5 minutes, and he goes, well, how did you feel? And he'd ask me like 3 times, 4 times, and I was wired to avoid, like, that was not part of any equation. It was what was the thing to do that was the right thing to do. And that may not have, without thought, right? Without thought, or without regard to adding myself to the situation. So, and how that affected me was in exactly what you said, Robert, like a a better degree of self-confidence, a huge amount of weight lifted off my shoulders because I could bring myself to the conversation and then not walk away from the conversation like quietly pissed off. It didn't go the way that something was wrong. And the muscle to even look at my feelings was so broken that I wouldn't even know why I was pissed off until, well, like a lot of those conversations over a number of years, which has been extraordinarily valuable to me.
That's beautiful, Lee, and it just I'm sure Robert has his chest stuck out after that now, but
Well, I'm pleased to have been a part of that, and I have to acknowledge Lee for exactly what we were talking about, the courage to do that, because it's one thing to have the information, it's another thing to step into it and continue to step into it until you get through it. And Lee had the power and perseverance and the courage to be willing to do that. And a lot of men don't. It's not an easy thing to do, to step into, essentially, you're God, the man who created you. That's the dynamic that you're talking about in terms of power and where you are in that equation, So it's a lot to do that.
I wanna bring Lee back into this because you said, and I'm always listening for the finer points. You mentioned something about the right thing to do. So actually, and maybe Robert wants to chime on into this too, but I asked Lee, so when you started to look at your feelings in a different way, did it become easier to know the right thing to do?
Yeah, the right thing to do was based on like how I was with all my fears and all my concerns and how I was raised, and like that bundle of automation that exists within you. Like if you're afraid to do something, the right thing to do would be avoid the thing you're afraid of, right? And without deeper research and looking at it, like what is there that I'm afraid of? So what is the real right thing to do, which is taking counsel for what's going on inside, exploring how I feel about stuff. Then you could start to figure out, well, oh, there's a barrier here. And the barrier is I'm afraid to confront that person. I don't want a conflict. I'm scared of that person. So let's, tamper down. Let's agree with them, right? So, and then you walk away ticked off because something was off in the situation without giving it the research. So the right thing to do was not necessarily worded correctly, right? The right thing to do was based on, however I grew up and the bundle of fears, concerns, weaknesses, things that, whatever that bundle was that formed me.
Robert, do you want to add on to that?
Yeah, I think, that it speaks to how difficult it is. I went through this too. I mean, you're looking at the entire world as it's been set up for you. And some party was saying, well, there's something off, but you're looking at literally your world and saying, do I know enough? Do I, have enough to confront this whole thing that I'm still part of? And I've been built in that environment and told everything, and I know all the realities of that. Do I have the willingness to challenge that and maybe blow that up in the process? And then what? Because nobody tells you what's on the other side of that if you do. What if somebody just says, I never want to see you again. I want to talk to you again. I'm disowning you. Which is possible, which has happened. And people have their own reactions to, being confronted that way too, because suddenly their world is blowing up too. So it's a huge risk. And it takes a lot to get to that point. But when you get your own clarity, and hopefully it says, this is what I need. Like you said, I need to do. So it's a conscious decision.
I like what you said there, Robert, in regards to, and I'm going to equate it and push back on me if you think I'm incorrect about the better you can relate to your feelings, the more clarity you're going to have.
Yes, absolutely. They are a guide and a compass. They're instincts. They're built into their survival instincts. You know, that would be like saying, well, stop breathing, hold your breath then. And it is like emotionally holding your breath. That's the effect it has on you, how it weakens you and
Yes.
disorients you. That's what it's like.
It's a very good, that's a great analogy. That is a great analogy. That is fantastic. I would like to know in regards to, and I think another area, I guess you had mentioned earlier about the whole shame factor. It's the impact of shame on men. What would you like to share with us in regards to that?
And I think that's such a big part of the dynamic that happens for men in society and personally. That sense of shame of not living up to an ideal of masculinity and manhood, and the kind of machinations and the way we twist and gyrate to try to fit into this mold of, you know, a masculine man who's tough and doesn't feel. You know, our humanity is the expense that we purchase that with, and it's never, you know, it's never a solid purchase because it's not real. You know, it's an artifice. So that's the sad part of it. And you do all the work to appear to look that way, and even to yourself, you're trying to look that way. And then the reality is that's not who we are. You know, we're not invulnerable. We do feel a lot of things. And as I said, when we're infants or till 7 years old, we feel more than, we express more emotions than the female gender does. So it's within us to do that, and it's a powerful dynamic. When harnessed, it's unstoppable, because you're not afraid of who you are, for starters. You're not trying to be what you think somebody else thinks you should be. You know, all your energies are not, you know, misdirected. They're focused on what you want. So, you know, how can that be bad? How can that be weak?
How does a man balance his feelings in conjunction with the feelings of others? Because, and the reason why I ask this is that everything a man does is going to affect at least one other person.
Well, it's a great question, but the first thing you have to do is understand them for yourself. You know, balance is the second thing, but you can't address balance if you don't understand for yourself. And so that, I mean, that's part of what Lee sort of referred to also. You start looking for an artificial reference for making decisions that has nothing to do with how you feel. So what's the right thing? Well, right, that's an open-ended question. You know, right is based on, you know, where are you in that dynamic? Is, you know, everybody has a different version of what right is. Now, some right things are absolutely clear, but in relationships, right is, you know, right's a movable feast. It's like it's all over the place. So, you know, you got to know what's right for you internally, you know, not just based on the 10 commandments or what the law is, or, you know, how most people are doing it. What's right for you, and own it.
I always say there's black and white, but then there's always the shades of gray.
Yeah. And a million shades of gray, right? Yeah.
The shades of gray.
And imagine just how confusing the world is if you don't have that compass. Now you're just like, you know, looking for frames of reference all the time to address the situation. So, and every situation may have a different frame of reference. And now you got to like, oh, well, what would they say if they were in this position, and what would they do, and how would that look? And you know, there's like, and there's no internal reference there. So, you know, you feel lost, you feel weak, you feel shame. All of those dynamics come up because your natural instincts are not working for you. You've shut them down.
Yeah. Standing alone in a cornfield.
Yeah, there you go.
That's what that analogy, you know, you're just all alone in a cornfield and the wind is blowing and you
don't know where to go.
Don't know where to go.
And that's exactly what it feels like, you know. And that's a scary place to be. It's a scary place to be.
Very true. Well, we'll start winding down the conversation. You have been outstanding as always.
It's the people that I work with. I have to tell you that, Dr. Vibe. I thank you.
Oh,
And you, Lee, and you for your honesty too, man, because I think that was a powerful statement that I think, you know, a lot of men, myself included, can relate to. I think that's a story for a lot of us out there.
absolutely. Absolutely. So, Robert, some final words for us when it comes to men and feelings as we're going through this journey, especially at this time of the world history.
Mm. Well, I think I can only repeat what I've been saying, that, you know, these are instincts. These are in a sense, I believe, the truest parts of us, because it's not about thinking. You know, these are instinctive reactions that are the result of millions and millions of years of evolution that are still powering us, that telling us not absolutely what to do, but they're a frame of reference, a compass that we disregard at our own peril. And not just our own peril, the people that we're in relationship with, our jobs, everything around that, because we're making decisions without our most important instincts. You know, this would be like, you know, the tiger going out to hunt and not using his sense of smell or hearing. It'd be like being blind and deaf and trying to navigate. So, you know, you're not using those instincts at your own peril. And there's a great reward beyond that to be able to know not only people and situations, but to cultivate deeper relationships. I mean, how do you do that without feeling and understanding those feelings and understanding other people's feelings? And you understand them by understanding your own. You know, if you can't understand it, if you've never felt that, how do you empathize? How do you empathize with your children? How do you teach them how to learn, how to manifest their feelings and enjoy things and enrich their lives? So the downside of not doing that is great. I mean, we talked about the health issues for starters. Living is difficult and challenged and affected by, you know, repressing your emotions. But every aspect of living is repressed. Your like I said, your relationships, your love, the people you care about, all of that. So it's critical. It's critical.
Yeah, I fully agree with what you're saying in regards to that. And I, as I say periodically through these conversations, I highly encourage. Robert will say, you know, become part of a men's group. I say also that men out there, please have 2 or 3 men in your life.
Absolutely.
That know everything good about you and everything bad about you. Or
right.
as we say, sometimes you have 2 or 3 ride or die guys.
Right. And if you don't have that, at least you should know.
Yes.
What's good about you and what's
Yes.
bad about you. Write it down and keep it in front of you. And
yes.
I think you'll be surprised when you make that list, because it's probably the first time that you've been aware of it.
And I would just add another level, that if you know that, and that the next level is you're comfortable sharing that.
Right.
And even more so, you're comfortable to share it to people you don't even know.
Right.
And probably it's easier to people you don't know than people you do know. But
right.
when you know those things, the next step is, are you comfortable sharing it? Because believe it or not, the biggest person that's going to benefit is you.
Yeah. Yeah. If you can accept you is the starting place, then other people will be easier.
Absolutely. Robert, if people want to get in touch with you, where can and how?
You can reach me at homcoaching@gmail.com. My email. And I'm on Facebook.
There you go.
Heart of Man Coaching.
Yeah. And I don't use email. I got a direct number, so I'm ahead of most people out there. So I got a direct, as we say back in the old digital days, I got a direct connect.
The direct line. That's right.
I got to the Heart of Man bat phone.
That'd be great to have a phone like that. Yeah, light up, right?
Well, I'd like to know how it would ring and what color it would be when Lee calls.
That's a good one, yeah.
But that's another conversation. So, just wrapping up here, folks. It is Dr. Vibe. I'm host and producer of the award-winning Dr. Vibe Show. But always at least once a month. I love this, where I get to host M&M Explores, which is produced by the Men and Masculinity team, which what's the word I'm looking for? Consists. There you go. Consists of Lee, who is team lead. There is Terry, there's Michelle, and there's Steve. If you want to find more information about Men and Masculinity, go to the website, www.menandmasculinity.com. Would like to thank all the people who watched live on Facebook tonight. Thank you so much. Fantastic. Thanks for the support. For those who did not catch us live, you can catch us on the Facebook page for Men and Masculinity Summit, or go to Men and Masculinity on YouTube, or you can go to the website. You'll catch the replays. And I'd like to say thank you to everyone who watched live or on the replay. I always end off by saying, live your life as a dream. If you can dream it, you can make it. Sometimes you have to get smaller to get stronger. Block assumptions and aim bigger, aim better, aim higher, aim wider. Thank you everyone for watching. We'll be back again next month, and we are working on a very special guest for next month. So keep locked with Men and Masculinity, because if we get this gentleman on, you will want to be here, on top of already wanting to be here when Robert's on. Good night, everybody.
Good night, Dr. Vibe Lee. Great to see you, man. Thanks.